It did not begin with a dramatic speech. There was no balcony appearance, no formal declaration, no grand moment for cameras to capture and replay for weeks. It began the way modern royal wars often do. Quietly, almost invisibly, with distance. A missing gesture here, a colder tone there, a public silence that said more than any statement ever could. And that is what makes this story so fascinating, because for years, people have treated the rift between Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, and the royal family like a temporary storm. A painful chapter, yes, but still a chapter in the same book. The assumption was always that somehow, eventually, there would be a path back, a softened stance, a family reset, a carefully staged reunion. But what if that moment never existed? What if the real turning point was not explosive at all, but administrative, emotional, and final? What if the monarchy did not need a dramatic public break because it had already decided, behind closed doors, to keep moving without them? And if that is true, then the most important question is not what Harry and Meghan said or what the palace said in return. The real question is this: at what exact moment did the Sussex story stop being a royal crisis and start becoming something else entirely? A separate world with separate rules, separate ambitions, and separate consequences. Because once you see that shift, everything looks different. At the center of this story are two completely different systems, trying to survive in public view. On one side, the monarchy, slow, guarded, ritualized, obsessed with continuity, an institution that survives not by reacting quickly, but by outlasting the noise around it. On the other side, Harry and Meghan, who stepped away from royal life and entered a world driven by visibility, narrative control, branding, and direct audience connection. Both sides understand power, but they understand it in completely different ways. That was always going to create friction for the palace. Silence is power. Restraint is power. Endurance is power. For modern celebrity culture, visibility is power. Telling your side is power. Owning the narrative is power. And for a while, it looked like Harry and Meghan believed they could beat the institution by doing what the institution refuses to do. Speak openly, emotionally, and repeatedly. They sat down for interviews. They released documentaries. They published books. They gave the world their version of events in a language the monarchy has never been comfortable speaking. And for millions watching around the world, that approach worked. It was immediate, human, emotional, personal. But institutions like the monarchy do not fight on those terms. That is where so many people misunderstand what happened. The royal family was never likely to win a public emotion contest. That was never the battlefield they chose. Instead, they did what old institutions always do when threatened. They narrowed the circle. They tightened the focus. They invested in the future they could control. And that future was never California. It was always the direct line of succession that matters, because royal life is not structured around who is most interesting, most charismatic, or most talked about online. It is structured around continuity, duty, predictability. The next heir, then the next after that. In other words, the monarchy does not reward energy. It rewards order. And once Harry stepped away, the institution did something emotionally brutal but strategically simple. It reorganized itself around the people still inside it. That meant William. That meant Catherine. That meant their children. That meant the future king. Everything else became secondary. And that shift may be the hardest truth of all, because public attention can create the illusion of centrality. If the headlines are about you, if documentaries are about you, if publishers want you, if audiences debate you every day, it can feel as if you are still at the heart of the story. But media attention and institutional importance are not the same thing. You can dominate headlines and still be moving further away from the center of power. That, more than anything, is what makes this saga so compelling. Harry and Meghan remained culturally magnetic, but the monarchy became increasingly comfortable functioning without them. That is not just a family issue. It is a structural one. And once an institution proves it can continue without you, your leverage changes. Think about what the palace has actually done over the past several years. Not what people imagined it might do. What it did, it kept going. Ceremonies continued. State visits continued. The succession story continued. Public symbolism continued. The machine did not stop, and that may have been the clearest message of all. Not anger, not revenge, not panic, not replacement, not of people as human beings, but of roles. Public roles, functional roles, symbolic roles. Because in a monarchy, personal feeling matters less than structural stability. That is why even small changes can feel enormous in royal life. A seating plan, a photo release, a title decision, a public appearance, a line on a website, a subtle shift in who is centered and who is not. To outsiders, these things can look minor. Inside royal logic, they are signals, and the signal, over time, became impossible to ignore. The Sussexes were no longer being treated as misunderstood insiders. They were being treated as external figures with a shared history, but no central role in the future of the crown. That is a very different thing now. Here is where the story becomes emotionally complicated. Because Harry was not just another royal relative, he was once seen as one of the monarchy's greatest modern assets: popular, spontaneous, military service, easy chemistry with the public. He brought warmth and unpredictability to a system often criticized for being too stiff. Then Meghan arrived, and for a brief moment, it felt like the monarchy had found something rare. A chance to look more modern, more global, more culturally relevant. That is why the fallout hit so hard. This was not the collapse of a marginal connection. It was the collapse of a major bet. And when a major bet fails inside an old institution, the reaction is rarely loud. It is controlled, quiet, deliberate. Doors do not always slam. Sometimes they simply stop opening. That is the emotional core of this entire saga. Not just conflict, but incompatibility. Harry and Meghan wanted freedom, independence, and the ability to define themselves outside palace control. The institution wanted discipline, alignment, and acceptance of its internal hierarchy. Both sides likely believed they were protecting themselves. Both sides likely believed they were telling the truth. But two truths can still become mutually destructive if they are built on completely different definitions of loyalty. That is why every new project, every new interview, every new statement seemed to widen the distance rather than close it, because from one perspective, speaking out was necessary. From the other, it was unforgivable. And once that cycle begins, every move hardens the next one. Public sympathy becomes public fatigue. Silence becomes strategy. Strategy becomes separation. Then one day, people wake up and realize the split is no longer developing. It is complete, not legally perhaps, not emotionally, not even historically, but symbolically. Yes. And symbols are the language monarchies speak best. So, where does that leave Harry and Meghan now? In a strange position, free, famous, globally recognized, still capable of commanding attention. But no longer able to assume that attention equals influence over the institution they left behind. That chapter has changed. And where does it leave the monarchy? Exactly where it prefers to be, looking past the noise and toward the next generation. That may sound cold. It may even sound cruel, but the monarchy has never survived by being emotionally satisfying. It survives by making itself feel permanent even when the people inside it are hurting. That is the trade at the heart of royal life. You gain symbolism, you lose freedom, you gain status, you lose privacy, you gain history, you surrender control. Harry and Meghan chose a different path, one built on autonomy rather than institution. The monarchy chose its own path to continuity over reconciliation at any cost, and maybe that is the simplest way to understand this entire story. This was never just a feud. It was a collision between two models of power, one ancient, one modern, one built on inheritance, one built on narrative, one built on silence, one built on disclosure. For a time, those two worlds were connected. Now they are drifting further apart, each convinced the other misunderstood. The price of survival. And perhaps that is the real ending here. Not a reconciliation, not a final explosion, not a dramatic last word, just distance made permanent, a family fracture that became a public realignment. A royal story that stopped being about return and started being about replacement. And once that happens, the hardest realization is also the quietest one. The institution does not need to win the argument, it only needs to keep going. So what do you think? Was this split always destined to become permanent, or is there still a path back that the public cannot yet see? Let me know in the comments. And if you want, I can turn this into an even sharper version with a stronger opening hook, mid-video cliffhangers, and a darker, more viral Royal Channel tone.